Hannah Reed's hands trembled against the clinic examination table, 30 weeks pregnant and 300 miles from the man she'd run from. The ultrasound screen showed her daughter's steady heartbeat, a secret she'd kept for 7 months. Outside, Providence's winter rain matched the storm building in her chest. She'd disappeared without a trace, changed her name, buried every connection to her old life. But as the doctor stepped out and Hannah reached for her coat, one terrible truth crystallized. You don't escape a man like Dante Marlowe by running. You escape by never being found. And today, her luck had just run out. If you're watching this story unfold, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're tuning in from. I want to see just how far Hannah and Dante's story travels across the world. Now, let's dive in. The fluorescent lights in the Providence Women's Health Clinic buzzed with the kind of persistent hum that made Hannah's skull ache. She lay on the examination table, paper crinkling beneath her as Dr. Patel moved the ultrasound wand across her swollen belly with practiced efficiency. The gel was cold, clinical, and Hannah focused on that sensation rather than the flutter of movement inside her. The constant reminder of what she was carrying and who had put it there. "Everything looks good, Hannah," Dr. Patel said, her voice warm with the kind of reassurance that came from delivering good news hundreds of times. "Baby's measuring right on track for 30 weeks. Heart rate is perfect. You're doing great." Hannah nodded, forcing a smile that felt like cracked porcelain across her face. That's good." But her pulse hammered against her throat, and it had nothing to do with medical anxiety. The fear that lived in her bones now wasn't about abnormalities or complications. It was about the moment when this pregnancy became visible to the world, when hiding became impossible, when he might find her. Dr. Patel printed out ultrasound images, the machine whirring softly. "You're still planning on staying in Providence for the delivery?" "Yes." The lie came smoothly now, after months of practice. "I have family here." She had no one. That was the point. 7 months ago, Hannah Reed had been Hannah Chen, a night shift nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan, living in a cramped studio in Washington Heights, existing in the comfortable anonymity of a city where 8 million people meant you could disappear into the crowd every single day. Her life had been small, predictable, safe. 12-hour shifts in the emergency department, Chinese takeout containers piling up in her tiny kitchen, true crime podcasts on her commute, and exactly 0 romantic complications. Then Dante Marlowe had walked through those automatic doors at 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in March, and every single thing had changed. Hannah accepted the ultrasound photos with hands that didn't quite shake, tucked them into her purse next to her ID, the Rhode Island driver's license that said Hannah Reed in clean block letters, the Social Security card she'd paid $3,000 for in a cash transaction in a diner bathroom in Newark, the life she'd constructed from lies and terror and the desperate animal instinct to protect what was growing inside her. "See you in 2 weeks, Dr. Patel said brightly. "And Hannah, try to relax. Stress isn't good for the baby." Hannah wanted to laugh. Relaxation wasn't an option when you'd run from a man who controlled half of Manhattan's underworld, when you'd vanished in the middle of the night with nothing but a duffel bag and the clothes you were wearing, when you woke up every morning wondering if today would be the day he found you. She thanked the doctor, heaved herself off the examination table. 30 weeks meant her center of gravity had shifted into some alternate dimension, and made her way to the clinic bathroom to clean the ultrasound gel off her skin. The mirror showed a woman she barely recognized anymore. Her hair, once long and dark, was now cut in a short, practical bob and lightened to an unremarkable brown. She'd gained weight beyond the pregnancy, deliberately changing her silhouette. Contact lenses instead of glasses. Cheaper clothes, no makeup, nothing that drew attention. Hannah Chen had been invisible by circumstance. Hannah Reed was invisible by design. She washed her hands, watching water circle the drain, and let herself remember what she'd been trying to forget for 7 months. Then, March, Manhattan. The gunshot victim had arrived just before 3 a.m., accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits that looked wrong against the emergency department's harsh lighting. Hannah had been triaging a drunk with a head laceration when the commotion started. Security called, nurses converging, the organized chaos that always accompanied trauma. GSW to the left shoulder, the paramedic had reported, transferring the patient to the trauma bay. Vital stable, patient refused pain medication in the ambulance, no loss of consciousness. Hannah had glanced over. Protocol said she shouldn't get involved. She wasn't assigned to trauma. But something made her look. And keep looking. The patient was conscious, sitting upright despite the blood soaking through his white dress shirt, and he was calm. Not shock calm or adrenaline calm, but genuinely, terrifyingly composed. Dark hair, sharp features, expensive watch still on his wrist, and eyes that tracked every person in the room with the precision of someone categorizing threats and exits. "I need someone competent," he'd said, his voice cutting through the noise with quiet authority. Not loud, not aggressive, just absolute. "Not an intern." Dr. Rodriguez, the attending, had bristled. "Sir, everyone here is qualified. I want her." Those eyes had found Hannah across the department, locked on, and everything in her body had gone still. The nurse at Station 3, Hannah's supervisor Linda, had frowned. "Hannah's not assigned to trauma tonight." "Then reassign her." It wasn't a request. They had. Because something about this patient, his stillness, his two silent companions who stood like statues by the door, the way even Dr. Rodriguez seemed nervous, suggested that arguing was a bad idea. So Hannah found herself gowning up, stepping into the trauma bay, meeting those dark eyes again as she approached with IV supplies. "I'm Hannah. I'll be assisting tonight." Dante. He'd offered it like a gift. "Pleased to meet you, Hannah." He hadn't flinched when she'd started the IV line, hadn't reacted when Dr. Rodriguez began probing the wound, a through-and-through, clean, probably a smaller caliber, and hadn't looked away from Hannah's face the entire time. "You're very steady," he'd observed while Rodriguez irrigated the wound channel. "Most people get nervous around blood." "I'm an ER nurse. Blood is kind of the job description." "Still, there's steady, and then there's you." A slight smile. "Cool under pressure. That's rare." Hannah had focused on documenting vitals, uncomfortable with the attention. Gunshot victims weren't unusual in this neighborhood, but most of them were either hysterical with pain or too high to care. This man was neither. He was watching her like she was the most interesting thing in the room, even with a bullet hole in his shoulder. "How did this happen?" Rodriguez had asked, the question protocol required. "Hunting accident," Dante had replied smoothly. "Upstate. My friend's terrible aim." No one believed him. The police would be called, mandatory for GSWs, and he'd tell them the same story, and they'd file a report that went nowhere because men like this, men with that kind of stillness and those kinds of companions, existed in spaces where normal rules bent. Hannah had finished her documentation, checked the wound dressing, and tried to step back. "You're all set. The doctor will want to keep you for observation. Have dinner with me." She'd blinked. "What?" "When your shift ends. Breakfast, technically, given the hour, but dinner sounds more romantic." That smile again, slight and devastating. "You can say no." "I'm saying no." "Fair enough." He'd accepted it with grace, no pressure, no persistence. "Thank you for your excellent care, Hannah." She'd left the trauma bay thinking that was the end of it. Random encounter, strange patient, forgotten by next week. But when her shift ended at 7 a.m. and she'd walked out into weak March sunlight, there'd been a car waiting. Black sedan, driver standing by the rear door, and Dante emerging from the back seat in a fresh suit, his left arm in a sling, looking impossibly awake for someone who'd been shot 4 hours ago. "I know you said no," he'd called across the parking lot, "but I'm hoping you might reconsider. There's a French place 3 blocks from here that does excellent crepes, just breakfast. 1 hour. I promise I'm more interesting than I look." Hannah should have walked away. Every instinct screamed danger. The expensive car, the driver, the gunshot wound he wore like an accessory, everything about him that suggested complications she didn't need. But she was exhausted from a 12-hour shift, and he was beautiful in the morning light, and there was something about the way he looked at her, like she mattered, like she was more than just another nurse in scrubs, that made her hesitate. 1 hour, she'd heard herself say, and you're paying. Naturally. That first breakfast had led to a second dinner, then a third. Then Dante showing up at her apartment with Thai food and an apology for being late. Business ran long, and staying to watch a movie that neither of them paid attention to because talking to him was like nothing Hannah had ever experienced. He was attentive, interested, asking questions about her life, her childhood in Seattle, her nursing school experience, her thoughts on everything from architecture to literature. He made her laugh with dry observations about New York's absurdities. He listened like every word she said was valuable, and he was careful, respectful. When he'd finally kissed her 3 weeks in, it had been after asking permission, soft and deliberate and patient when she'd pulled back, startled by how much she wanted it. Too fast? He'd murmured. No, just unexpected. Good unexpected? Very good unexpected. They'd fallen into something that felt real. Dante would disappear sometimes. Business trips, he'd said, import-export, never quite explaining the details. But when he was present, he was completely present. He remembered everything Hannah told him. He brought her favorite coffee without asking. He showed up at her apartment at 3 a.m. when she texted that she'd had a bad shift, just to hold her while she decompressed. 2 months in, he'd taken her to his apartment, a penthouse in Tribeca that should have been the first real warning sign, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art and furniture that cost more than Hannah's annual salary. And she'd let herself believe the import-export story because she wanted to, because he was gentle with her, because falling in love was easier than asking hard questions. They'd made love that night with Manhattan glittering below them, and Dante had touched her like she was precious. And Hannah had thought maybe, impossibly, she'd found something rare and good. Then June happened. She'd been at his place, comfortable enough now to show up with her own key, letting herself in after an early shift. Dante wasn't home yet, still at a meeting, but she'd planned to surprise him with dinner. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, when she'd heard his voice in the hallway. I don't care about his excuses, Marco. He had 2 weeks to deliver and he didn't. That's a problem. Hannah had frozen, knife suspended above the cutting board. Examples need to be made. Dante's voice was cold, empty of the warmth she knew. The warehouse on Pier 19. Make it clean, make it quiet, and make sure everyone understands what happens when you waste my time. No loose ends. A pause. I don't want to hear his name again after tonight. Handle it. The front door had closed. Footsteps in the hall. Then Dante had appeared in the kitchen doorway, and his face had transformed, the coldness evaporating, replaced by genuine pleasure. Hannah, I didn't know you were coming over. She'd stood there, knife still in hand, mind racing. Warehouse, clean, quiet, no loose ends. Surprise, she'd managed. He'd crossed to her, kissed her forehead, seemed to notice nothing wrong. This is perfect. I've been thinking about you all day. Hannah had finished making dinner in a fog, smiled and responded, and moved through the evening on autopilot while her brain tried to process what she'd heard. Maybe she'd misunderstood. Maybe it was legitimate business. Maybe handle it meant something normal and legal and not at all like what it sounded like. But she'd started paying attention after that. And once you started seeing the cracks, they were everywhere. The phone calls Dante took in another room, his voice dropping to that cold register. The men who stopped by the apartment, always well-dressed, always respectful, but with eyes that tracked movement like predators. The way Dante carried himself in public, the slight deference other people showed him, the conversations that stopped when he approached. The night she'd woken at 2 a.m. to find him sitting in the dark living room, blood on his knuckles, staring at nothing. Dante? She'd approached carefully. What happened? He'd looked at her, and for just a moment, she'd seen something vast and dangerous in his expression. Then he'd blinked, and it was gone. Work. It's handled. Go back to bed. Your hands. Go back to bed. Not angry, but absolute. She had. And in the morning, his knuckles had been bandaged, and he'd made her coffee and kissed her goodbye, and neither of them mentioned it. Hannah had told herself she was being paranoid, jumping to conclusions, watching too many crime dramas. Then she'd missed her period. The pregnancy test had been positive on the first try, 2 pink lines appearing in the CVS bathroom during her lunch break, the floor tilting beneath her feet. She'd taken 3 more tests, different brands, all positive, and sat on the bathroom floor trying to breathe through the panic, pregnant, with Dante's child, a man she'd been with for 4 months, a man she loved, a man who might, possibly, probably, be exactly the kind of dangerous she'd been trying not to see. She'd planned to tell him that evening, had rehearsed the words. But when she'd arrived at his apartment, he'd been on the phone again, and this time she'd heard enough to kill any remaining doubt. The DA is asking questions about the shipment. We have someone in her office, but she's persistent. I know. If it becomes a real problem, we'll handle it the usual way. No, I don't want anyone touched unless absolutely necessary. Too much attention. Just make sure our people in the precinct know to lose the paperwork. Hannah had backed out of the apartment silently, taking her key off the ring and leaving it on the hallway console table. She'd gone home to her studio and packed a bag with hands that shook so hard she could barely zip it closed. Dante Marlowe wasn't in import-export. He was in crime. Real, organized, dangerous crime. The kind where people disappeared and paperwork got lost, and DAs asking questions became problems to be handled. And she was carrying his baby. She'd left that night, took the cash she'd been saving, about $4,000, and bought a bus ticket to Philadelphia with a credit card she'd cancel immediately after. In Philadelphia, she'd paid for the fake ID, the new Social Security card, the documents that would let Hannah Reed exist. She'd taken another bus to Providence, found a room in a boarding house that didn't ask questions, and paid 3 months' rent up front in cash. Then she'd disappeared, deactivated all social media, changed her phone number, abandoned every connection to her old life, started working at a small urgent care clinic under the table while her new credentials were verified, a process that involved more cash and fewer questions. By the time she was 12 weeks pregnant, Hannah Chen no longer existed anywhere that mattered. She'd convinced herself Dante would move on, that she'd been one of many women, easily replaced, that a man with his resources and his power had better things to do than chase down a nurse he'd dated for 4 months. She'd been so sure distance would keep her safe. Now, Providence. Hannah stepped out of the clinic bathroom, purse slung over her shoulder, 30 weeks pregnant and exhausted. The waiting room was half full. Pregnant women in various stages, some with partners, some alone, all of them existing in that strange limbo of anticipation and anxiety that defined the third trimester. She checked out at the front desk, scheduled her next appointment, and pushed through the clinic's front doors into cold November air. Providence's winter had come early this year, all gray skies and biting wind, and Hannah pulled her coat tighter as she navigated the steps down to the parking lot. Her car was parked in the back row, a used Honda Civic she'd bought for $2,000 cash, unremarkable and forgettable. She was fishing for her keys when instinct made her glance toward the clinic entrance, and the world stopped. Dante Marlowe stood in the clinic lobby, visible through the glass doors, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, looking exactly as she remembered, and somehow more devastating for the 7 months that had passed. His dark hair was shorter, his face harder, but those eyes, sharp and dark and absolutely focused, were scanning the waiting room with systematic precision, looking for someone, looking for her. Hannah's keys slipped from nerveless fingers, clattered against the pavement. Her heart was a drum, a scream, a failing engine in her chest. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stand there, 30 weeks pregnant with his child, watching him search. This was impossible. She'd been so careful. No digital footprint, no connections, no trail. But he'd found her anyway. As she watched, paralyzed, Dante's gaze swept across the parking lot and stopped, locked onto her through the glass and the distance like a physical impact. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then his eyes dropped, deliberate, inexorable, to her belly, to the obvious, undeniable swell beneath her coat, to the truth she'd been hiding for 7 months. Hannah watched his face change, watched realization hit like a bullet, the same terrible stillness that had fascinated her the night they met, but now tinged with something rawer, shock, fury, devastation. All of it locked behind rigid control. He didn't move toward her, didn't call out, just stood there, one hand pressed against the glass, staring at the evidence of what she'd kept from him. Then, slowly, precisely, he pushed through the clinic doors and stepped outside. Hannah's paralysis shattered. She grabbed her keys, lunged for the car, hands shaking so hard the key scraped against the lock 3 times before she managed to get the door open. She threw herself into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition. "Don't!" His voice, right outside her window, close enough to touch. Hannah's head snapped up, Dante stood beside her car, not threatening, not blocking, just there, present, real. The ghost she'd been running from made flesh. "Please," he said quietly, "don't run again." Her hands were locked on the steering wheel, engine running, every muscle screaming to flee. But something in his voice, not anger, not demand, just exhaustion, and something that sounded like pain, made her hesitate. "How did you find me?" Her voice came out broken. "Does it matter?" "Yes." Dante's jaw worked. "I've been looking for 7 months, Hannah. Every city between here and Seattle. Every hospital. Every clinic. Every urgent care center. I found 43 women who matched your description. You were number 44. 7 months." He'd spent 7 months searching. "You shouldn't have looked," she whispered. "You're carrying my child." His voice cracked on the last word. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" Hannah's eyes burned. She wanted to scream at him, that she'd been terrified, that she'd heard him order violence like it was nothing, that she'd run to protect their baby from a world where people disappeared and problems were handled. But her throat closed around the words. "Why didn't you tell me?" Dante asked. Not angry now, just wounded. "When you found out, why didn't you—" He stopped, pressed his palms against his eyes. "I would have, Hannah, I would have done anything, changed anything. Why did you run?" "Because I heard you." The words tore out of her. That night in June, the phone call, the warehouse, the DA, making problems disappear. I heard it all, Dante, and I couldn't bring a baby into that. Silence. Dante's hands dropped, and his face was devastated. "So you disappeared," he said finally. "Changed your name, became someone else. Let me think you were—" He couldn't finish. "Do you have any idea what these months have been like? Thinking you were hurt, or worse, or just gone? I had to protect our child." He gestured at her belly, his control fracturing. "By keeping her existence a secret? By making sure I would never know I was going to be a father? That's protection?" "You're a criminal," Hannah shouted, and several people in the parking lot turned to stare. She lowered her voice, vicious and desperate. "You run an empire built on violence and fear. You make people disappear, Dante. You order executions over the phone like it's nothing. What was I supposed to do? Stay? Raise a baby in that world? Let our daughter grow up watching you." "Watching me what?" His voice went very soft, very dangerous. "Say it." Hannah met his eyes. "Watching you become a monster." The words landed like a slap. Dante went absolutely still, and for a moment Hannah saw the man from the phone calls, cold, remote, capable of terrible things. Then his shoulders sagged, and he looked away. "You're right," he said quietly. "About everything. The business, the violence, the darkness, all of it. You're right to be afraid." He turned back to her, and his eyes were raw. "But you're wrong about one thing. I could never be a monster to her, to you. You're the only real thing I've had in 10 years, Hannah. You and—" His gaze dropped to her belly again. "And her. How do you know it's a girl?" The ghost of a smile. "I don't. Instinct. Am I right?" Hannah said nothing, which was answer enough. Dante exhaled. "I'm not asking you to come back to New York. I'm not asking you to trust me or forgive me or pretend the last 7 months didn't happen. I'm just asking—" He stopped, struggling. "Let me be part of this, please. I'll prove I can change. I'll do whatever you need. But don't shut me out of her life before it even begins." Every rational part of Hannah screamed to refuse, to drive away, disappear again, protect her daughter from the inevitable tragedy of loving a man who lived in shadows. But she looked at Dante, really looked, and saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. Real, genuine human fear that she would say no. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. Hope flared in his expression. "Anything. No weapons. Not around me, not around her, not ever. Done. No violence, no threats, no using your resources to intimidate or control. Done. You don't get to decide where I live or how I live. I'm not moving back to New York. I'm staying here, and you don't get a say in that." "Okay. And if I think for 1 second that you're bringing danger into our daughter's life, I disappear again. And next time, you won't find me." Dante flinched but nodded. Understood. Hannah's hands were still shaking. I don't know if I believe you can change. I don't know if any of this is possible, but she pressed a hand to her belly. She deserves to know her father. If you can prove you're someone worth knowing, I will. Dante's voice was rough. I swear to you, Hannah, I will prove it. She didn't know if she believed him. Didn't know if men like Dante Marlowe could really walk away from the darkness they'd built. But she saw the desperation in his eyes, and despite everything, some traitorous part of her heart still remembered what it felt like to love him. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here, she said finally. We can talk. Just talk. And then you leave, and I decide when we meet again. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Hannah pulled out of the parking space, watched in her rearview mirror as Dante walked to his own car. Black Mercedes, of course, because some things didn't change. She drove to the coffee shop on automatic, parked, and sat gripping the steering wheel until her breathing steadied. This was insane. She was about to have coffee with the man she'd run from, the man whose world was built on violence, the man who'd somehow tracked her across 3 states and 7 months because he refused to give up, the man who was her daughter's father. Hannah climbed out of the car, one hand pressed to her belly, where Lila, she'd named her Lila, alone in a Providence apartment, whispering the name like a promise, kicked against her ribs as if sensing the storm outside. It's okay, Hannah murmured. We're okay. I've got you. But as Dante's Mercedes pulled into the parking space beside hers, and he emerged looking simultaneously powerful and vulnerable in his expensive suit, Hannah wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Or if, impossibly, she'd just given them all a chance at something different. She'd find out soon enough. The coffee shop was one of those aggressively comfortable places designed to make customers linger. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, indie music playing just below conversation level. Hannah chose a table in the back corner, away from the windows, her nursing instincts automatically cataloging exits and sightlines. Old habits from the ER, she told herself. Not paranoia. Dante returned from the counter carrying 2 cups, setting a decaf latte in front of her without asking. He'd remembered. Of course he had. The man who remembered everything, who'd tracked her across 3 states, who looked at her now like she was something precious and dangerous all at once. Thank you, Hannah said, wrapping her hands around the cup for something to hold on to. He sat across from her, and the silence stretched tight and terrible between them. Up close, she could see the changes 7 months had carved into him, new lines around his eyes, a hardness in his jaw that hadn't been there before, shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He looked like a man who'd been through war. You look tired, she said finally. I haven't slept properly since June. Dante's voice was rough. Every night, I wondered if you were safe, if you were eating, if you were alone somewhere, afraid, needing help. I couldn't give because I didn't know where you were. Hannah's throat tightened. I've been fine. You've been hiding. Not an accusation, just fact. Working under the table at an urgent care clinic, living in a boarding house under a fake name, paying for everything in cash. That's not fine, Hannah. That's survival. She stared at him. How do you know all that? Because I know you. Dante leaned forward slightly. You're too good a nurse to stop working, but you'd avoid hospitals where background checks are thorough. You'd need income, but couldn't risk official employment. You'd find somewhere cheap to live that didn't ask for references. And you'd pay cash for everything because credit cards leave trails. He paused. I know you because I spent 4 months learning everything about you, and I've spent 7 months trying to find you. So yes, I know how you've been surviving. The accuracy was terrifying. Hannah took a shaky sip of her latte. You said you found 43 other women first. Women who matched your general description. Different hair, different names, but the right age, the right build, working in medical fields in cities between New York and the West Coast. His hands wrapped around his own cup, knuckles white. I hired investigators in every state, checked employment records, housing registries, DMV databases. Every lead that came back, I followed personally. That must have been expensive. Money isn't the point. What is the point, Dante? Hannah's voice cracked. You run a criminal empire. You have enemies, rivals, people who want to hurt you. Finding me, being here, it doesn't change what you are. It doesn't make this safe. Dante was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee like it held answers. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. You asked me once what I did for a living. Import-export, I said. That was true, technically. I do import things. Goods that people want but can't get through legal channels. And I export problems for people who can afford my services. That's not an answer. That's wordplay. You want specifics? He met her eyes, and the coldness she'd heard on the phone flickered in his expression. I run shipping operations through 5 ports. I have interests in 3 casinos, 2 construction companies, and a fleet of trucks that move merchandise across state lines. I employ 200 people directly and another 500 indirectly. Some of what I do is legal. Most of it exists in gray areas, and yes, some of it crosses lines that decent people don't cross. Hannah's heart hammered. The phone call I heard, the warehouse, the DA asking questions, was about a shipment of electronics that came in without proper customs declarations. The DA was sniffing around because someone tipped her off, and I needed that problem contained. Dante's jaw tightened. I didn't kill anyone, Hannah. I made phone calls, applied pressure in the right places, and made sure certain paperwork disappeared. That's how my world works. Leverage, pressure, control. And the man you told Marco to handle? Make it clean? Make it quiet? Dante flinched. He stole from me. $50,000 worth of merchandise that he sold to a competitor, then lied about it for 2 weeks while I gave him chances to come clean. So yes, I told Marco to handle it. He got beaten badly enough to understand the consequences of betrayal, and he was given 24 hours to leave the state. He's alive, Hannah. Probably working construction in Florida now, staying far away from anything connected to me. You beat someone until they fled the state, and you're telling me this like it's reasonable. In my world, it is reasonable. It's mercy. His voice went hard. If I'd been the man you're afraid I am, he would have disappeared into the harbor, and no one would have asked questions. But I don't kill people for stealing, and I don't order executions. I operate in darkness, but I'm not a monster. Hannah wanted to believe him. But the gap between the Dante she'd loved and the Dante sitting across from her felt impossibly wide. You said you'd prove you could change. How? How do you walk away from an empire? Carefully, slowly, and with considerable financial loss. Dante pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and slid it across the table. This is what I've been doing for the last 7 months when I wasn't searching for you. Hannah looked at the screen. It showed a document, legal language, dense and incomprehensible, but certain phrases jumped out. Asset liquidation, corporate restructuring, ownership transfer. I don't understand. I'm dismantling it. Dante's voice was flat. The shipping operations are being sold to a legitimate international firm. The casinos are going to a buyer in Atlantic City. The construction companies are transferring to my second-in-command, who'll run them straight. Everything that exists in legal gray areas is being separated from everything that doesn't. Hannah's breath caught. Why? Because you're right. He took the phone back, turned it off, set it aside. A child shouldn't grow up in that world. I've spent 10 years building an empire on leverage and fear, and I've told myself it was necessary, that I was providing for people, that I kept violence to a minimum. But you heard one phone call and ran 300 miles. That tells me everything I need to know about what I've become. People don't just walk away from that kind of power. I'm not walking away. I'm burning it down piece by piece and building something different from the ashes. Dante's eyes were fierce. It'll take time. 6 months, maybe a year. But by the time our daughter is born, I won't be the man you ran from. Our daughter. He said it with such certainty, such ownership, and Hannah's hand went instinctively to her belly. You keep saying she, Hannah said quietly. You really think it's a girl? I know it's a girl. A ghost of a smile. Call it instinct. Am I wrong? She shook her head slowly. The ultrasound confirmed it 2 weeks ago. A girl. Dante's face transformed, pure, unguarded joy, flooding his expression for just a moment before he locked it down again. But his hands were shaking when he picked up his coffee. A daughter. We're having a daughter. I'm having a daughter, Hannah corrected. I don't know what you are yet. The joy dimmed. Fair. They sat in silence, the reality of the situation settling over them like snow. Hannah studied the man across from her, this strange amalgamation of the tender lover she'd known and the dangerous criminal she'd discovered. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe people could change, that love could redeem, that their daughter could have a father who wasn't defined by darkness. But wanting wasn't the same as believing. "Tell me about the last 7 months," Dante said suddenly. "How you've been. If you've been taking care of yourself. If you've been alone." Hannah hesitated, then found herself talking. About the initial terror of running, sleeping in bus stations and cheap motels, the paranoia that every stranger was one of Dante's people. About finding Providence, the boarding house run by Mrs. Chen, no relation, just cosmic irony, who'd rented her a room and asked no questions. About the urgent care clinic where she worked nights, treating sprained ankles and ear infections and everything mundane and safe. About the loneliness, the bone-deep isolation of carrying a child alone, going to appointments alone, lying awake at 3 a.m. feeling Lila kick and having no one to share it with. "I almost called you," she admitted. "Twice. Once when I was 12 weeks and so sick I couldn't keep anything down for 3 days straight. And once at 20 weeks when I felt her move for the first time. I had my old phone out, your number pulled up, and I just couldn't." Dante's expression was devastated. "I would have come. Dropped everything and come." "I know, that's why I didn't call." He absorbed that like a blow. "You said you have conditions. No weapons, no violence, no control. What else?" Hannah gathered her courage. "I need to know who you really are. Not the version you showed me in Manhattan, the one designed to make me fall in love. The real you. The one who gives orders on phone calls and makes people disappear. I told you, I don't kill." "Into other states after beating them," Hannah finished. "The one who has people in police departments and DA offices. The one who built an empire in 10 years. I need to know that person, Dante. Because if we're doing this, if you're going to be in our daughter's life, I can't have secrets. I can't have you hiding parts of yourself and letting me discover them by accident." Dante was quiet for a long time, his jaw working. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but not here. This conversation needs privacy, and you need to decide if you're ready to hear it." "When?" "Tomorrow, tonight, whenever you say." He leaned forward. "But Hannah, understand, once you know everything, you can't unknow it. Some things will be ugly, some will be worse than ugly. And you might decide you were right to run, that I'm exactly the monster you're afraid of. Then I'll run again. I won't chase you this time." His voice was raw. "If you hear everything and decide you want nothing to do with me, I'll stay away. I'll set up a trust for our daughter, make sure she never wants for anything, but I won't force myself into her life. That's my promise." Hannah studied him, trying to read truth in the lines of his face. "And if I decide to give this a chance, what then?" "Then I prove every day that I'm someone worth trusting. I show up. I keep my word. I become the kind of father she deserves." Dante's hand moved across the table, stopping just short of touching hers. "And maybe, eventually, I become someone you can forgive." The air between them was electric, charged with all the history and hurt and impossible hope they carried. Hannah looked at his hand, so close, not quite touching, giving her the choice, and felt 7 months of careful control beginning to crack. "I live on Benefit Street," she said quietly. "Third floor of a blue Victorian, tomorrow at 7. Come alone and we'll talk." Relief flooded his face. "I'll be there." "And Dante?" She finally let her hand move, just enough for her fingertips to brush his. "Don't make me regret this." His fingers curled gently around hers, warm and careful. "I won't. I swear." They finished their coffee and careful conversation, surface details, safe topics, dancing around the enormous truth sitting between them. Dante asked about her pregnancy symptoms, listened with fierce attention as she described morning sickness and food aversions and the strange way her body was becoming something unfamiliar. Hannah asked about New York, if he was still in the Tribeca apartment, if anything had changed. "I sold it," Dante said. "Too many memories. I'm in a hotel now while I figure out what comes next." "You sold a Tribeca penthouse?" "Everything changes, Hannah. Everything." When they finally left the coffee shop, the sun was setting over Providence, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Dante walked her to her car, keeping a careful distance, respecting boundaries she hadn't had to voice. "Drive safe," he said. "Text me when you're home. I don't have your number anymore." He pulled out his phone, and hers buzzed a moment later with an incoming text. Just his name, no message. Hannah saved the contact with shaking hands. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow." She drove back to Benefit Street in a daze, her mind spinning through the impossibility of what had just happened. Dante was here. He'd found her. He knew about Lila, and instead of the confrontation she'd feared, anger, demands, the full weight of his power forcing her back into his world, he'd been careful, respectful. Desperate, yes, but restrained. The man who made people disappear into other states had sat across from her and asked permission to be in his daughter's life. Hannah parked in front of the blue Victorian, climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, and locked the door behind her with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The apartment was small, studio with a bathroom, kitchenette in one corner, secondhand furniture, and a bassinet she'd bought at a thrift store. But it was hers. Safe. Anonymous. Except it wasn't anonymous anymore. She collapsed onto the bed, one hand on her belly where Lila was doing acrobatics. "What have I done?" she whispered to her daughter. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" But even as fear whispered all the reasons this was a mistake, another part of her, small and desperate and hopeful, remembered what it felt like to love Dante Marlowe, to be loved by him, to believe for 4 perfect months that she'd found something rare and real. Maybe people could change. Maybe redemption was possible. Maybe their daughter could have both parents, a family instead of fragments. Or maybe Hannah had just invited the wolf back into her life, and tomorrow she'd discover exactly how sharp his teeth were. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dante. "Thank you for today, for giving me a chance. Sleep well." Hannah stared at the message, then typed back, "Don't make me regret it." His response came immediately, "I won't." 3 days later, Hannah learned just how complicated "I won't" could become. She woke Tuesday morning to pounding on her apartment door, hard, insistent, official. Through the peephole, she saw 2 Providence police detectives, badges visible, faces grim. Her heart stopped. They'd found her. Found the fake ID, the forged documents, everything she'd built to disappear. She was going to jail, and Lila was going to be born in a prison hospital. And, "Miss Reed," one of the detectives called, "we need to ask you some questions about Dante Marlowe." Not about her. About Dante. Hannah opened the door on shaking legs. "What about him?" The detective, middle-aged, tired eyes, too many years on the job, pulled out a notebook. "We understand you've been in contact with Mr. Marlowe recently. Can you confirm that?" Yes, we had coffee on Saturday. Why?" "What's the nature of your relationship?" Hannah's mind raced. "We dated briefly in New York, reconnected recently. What's this about?" The second detective, younger and harder, stepped forward. "Mr. Marlowe is a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. We need to know everything about your interactions with him. When you met, what you discussed, if he's contacted you since Saturday." Person of interest. Not suspect, not arrest warrant, but close enough to make Hannah's blood run cold. "What investigation?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss that, but Ms. Reed, if Mr. Marlowe has threatened you or made you feel unsafe in any way, we can help." "He hasn't threatened me." "Are you sure?" "Because his associates have a history of intimidation. If he's pressuring you to stay silent, he's not." Hannah forced her voice steady. "We had coffee, we talked, that's all." The detectives exchanged glances. The older one sighed. "Miss Reed, Dante Marlowe isn't who you think he is. He's connected to organized crime in New York. Racketeering, extortion, illegal gambling, the man is dangerous." "I appreciate your concern." Hannah kept her hand on the door, ready to close it. "But unless you're charging me with something, I think we're done here. We're trying to protect you." "I don't need protection." It was a lie, and they probably knew it, but after another tense moment, the detectives left, though not before handing her a card and telling her to call if Dante contacted her again. Hannah closed the door, locked it, and slid down to sit on the floor, heart hammering. This was what Dante's world looked like from the outside. Police investigations, questions about associates, warnings about danger. This was the reality she'd have to navigate if she let him back into her life. Her phone rang. Dante's name on the screen. "Were you just visited by Providence PD?" he asked without preamble. "How did you—" "Yes. They wanted to know about our relationship." "What did you tell them?" "That we had coffee. Nothing else." Hannah's voice shook. "Dante, they said you're under investigation for racketeering and extortion." "I am. Or I was. The investigation's been ongoing for 18 months, but they don't have anything concrete. It'll fold in another few weeks when their key witness recants." He paused. "I didn't know they'd track you down. I'm sorry. I should have warned you." "Their key witness is going to recant? Just like that?" "He's being offered a better deal elsewhere. Nothing violent, Hannah. Just leverage. The kind that makes problems go away." This was it. The moment where Hannah had to decide if the man promising to change was actually changing or just rearranging the same darkness into prettier shapes. "I thought you were dismantling your empire," she said quietly. "I am. But I can't do it overnight, and I can't do it from a federal prison. So, yes, I'm using the resources I still have to make sure that investigation dies. Then I can focus on burning everything else down." His voice hardened. "I won't apologize for protecting myself, Hannah. Not when the alternative is being locked away when our daughter is born." He had a point, a cold, calculated, morally gray point, but a point nonetheless. "The detective said I should call them if you contact me again." "Will you?" Hannah closed her eyes. "No." She heard him exhale. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Because you want to believe I can be better," Dante finished softly. "I know. And I will be, Hannah. I promise." After he hung up, Hannah sat on her apartment floor for a long time, one hand on her belly, trying to convince herself she'd made the right choice. Lila kicked, hard, insistent, and Hannah whispered, "I know, baby. I know. This is terrifying, but maybe it'll be okay." Wednesday brought the first gift, a package left at her door with no return address. Inside, a baby blanket so soft it felt like touching clouds, pale yellow with delicate embroidery along the edges. No note, but Hannah knew who'd sent it. Thursday brought the second, a text from Dante with a photo attached. A trust fund document, legally notarized, setting aside $2 million in Lila's name. Access restricted until she turned 18, managed by an independent trustee, untouchable by either parent. Hannah stared at the number until it stopped looking real. $2 million. For a daughter Dante had never met, might never meet if Hannah decided to run again. Friday evening, there was a knock on her door. Not police this time, but a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Vance, an OBGYN from Women and Infants Hospital. "I don't have an appointment," Hannah said, confused. "I know. This is a personal visit. May I come in?" Wary, Hannah let her enter. Dr. Vance settled into the apartment's single chair and got straight to the point. "A mutual acquaintance asked me to check on you. Make sure you're receiving adequate prenatal care, that everything is progressing normally." He was quite concerned. "Dante sent you." "He did, with instructions to provide any medical support you need, no questions asked, and to bill him directly." Dr. Vance smiled gently. "I'm not here to pressure you into anything, but if you'd like a second opinion on your pregnancy, or access to better facilities for delivery, or just someone to talk to about your options, I'm available." Hannah wanted to be angry about the intrusion, the way Dante was inserting himself into her life through expensive gifts and well-meaning doctors. But sitting across from this kind-faced woman who specialized in high-risk pregnancies, who'd come to her shabby apartment without judgment, she felt something else instead. Cared for. Protected. Seen. "Everything's been normal so far," Hannah said slowly. "But I've been worried about delivery. The clinic I go to is fine for prenatal care, but for labor—" She trailed off. "Women and Infants is one of the best facilities in New England. We have a level 4 NICU, private birthing suites, excellent staff-to-patient ratios. And if you decide to deliver there, I'd be honored to be your attending physician." Dr. Vance pulled out a card. "Think about it. No pressure, but the offer stands. After she left, Hannah held the card for a long time, feeling the weight of what Dante was doing. Not controlling her choices, not demanding access, just quietly building a safety net beneath her, making sure she and Lila had everything they needed, whether he was in their lives or not. It was manipulation, in a way. Gentle, well-intentioned manipulation designed to show her he cared, that he could provide, that choosing him meant choosing security. But it was also just care, real, tangible effort to make her life easier. Hannah texted him. Dr. Vance came by. His response, "I hope that was okay. I just wanted to make sure you had options." Another text quickly following, "I'm not trying to control you. If it felt that way, I'm sorry." Hannah stared at her phone, then typed, "It didn't feel like control. It felt like you were thinking about what we might need. Thank you for that." Saturday evening, exactly 1 week after the coffee shop, Dante knocked on her door at 7 p.m. sharp. Hannah had spent all day cleaning the tiny apartment, changing clothes 3 times, trying to calm the anxiety that made her hands shake every time she thought about the conversation they were about to have. She opened the door. Dante stood in the hallway dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him. Dark jeans, sweater, leather jacket, and holding a bag of Chinese takeout. "I remembered you liked the dumplings from Golden Dragon," he said. "Thought we could eat while we talk." Hannah stepped aside to let him in, watched him take in her small space with careful eyes. He didn't comment on the size or the shabbiness, just set the food on her tiny table and started unpacking containers with familiar efficiency. They ate in careful silence at first, the intimacy of sharing a meal breaking down some of the tension. Then Dante set down his chopsticks and met her eyes. "You wanted to know who I really am," he said. "So ask. Whatever you want. I'll answer honestly." Hannah took a breath. "How did you get into this life?" "I was 22, working construction in Brooklyn, barely making rent. My crew was doing renovations on a restaurant that turned out to be a front for a gambling operation. The owner, Vincent Castellano, saw something in me, offered me a job running security." Dante's voice was flat, factual. "I was good at it, good at reading people, anticipating problems, staying calm under pressure. Within 2 years, I was managing 3 of his operations. Within 5, I'd learned enough to start my own." "And Vincent just let you go?" "Vincent died of a heart attack. His sons couldn't hold the empire together. Too much infighting, too little discipline. I took advantage of the chaos, made deals with the right people, and built something more efficient, less visible." He looked at her. "I've never killed anyone, Hannah, but I've hurt people, ordered people hurt, used fear and leverage to get what I wanted. I'm not going to pretend I'm innocent." "The investigation, racketeering and extortion, is it true?" "Racketeering, yes. I controlled multiple businesses that operated outside legal boundaries." "Extortion?" He hesitated. "Depends on your definition. I never threatened violence for money, but I did use information and pressure to make people comply with my wishes. If that's extortion, then yes, guilty." Hannah's stomach churned. "And you're just walking away from all of that?" "I'm trying to. It's complicated. I have people who depend on me for income, operations that can't just shut down overnight without causing chaos. But I'm transferring ownership, selling assets, severing ties. By next summer, Dante Marlowe won't exist in any criminal database." He leaned forward. "I'm doing this for her, for Lila." Hannah's breath caught at hearing him use their daughter's name. "I never told you that." "It was on the ultrasound photo in your purse, when you set it on the table at the coffee shop." A slight smile. "Lila, it's perfect." She should be angry about him snooping, but all she felt was tired. What if you can't walk away? What if your enemies come after you? "I've been very careful to make sure walking away is possible. I've shared enough information with enough people that if something happens to me, everyone goes down together. Mutually assured destruction. It's not elegant, but it works." "That doesn't sound like you're out. That sounds like you're trapped." Dante's jaw tightened. "I am trapped. I've been trapped for 10 years in a world I built with my own hands. But I'm finding the exit, Hannah. Slowly, carefully, but I'm finding it." They talked for hours. About his business, his regrets, the things he'd done that kept him awake at night. About the beatdowns he'd ordered, the bribes he'd paid, The way he'd learned to operate in shadows so deep most people never knew he existed. He didn't justify or excuse, just laid it all out with brutal honesty. And Hannah listened, watching this man she'd loved and feared in equal measure, trying to reconcile the tender lover with the crime boss, the attentive father-to-be with the man who made people flee states. "Why me?" she asked finally. "You could have any woman. Why did you pursue a night shift nurse with no money and no connections?" Dante was quiet for a moment. "Because you looked at me like I was just a man, not a threat, not an opportunity, just a person. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" His voice roughened. "Everyone in my world wants something. They fear me, or they want to use me, or they're calculating angles. But you just took care of my gunshot wound and told me I needed to eat better and smiled at me like I was worth smiling at." I'd forgotten what that felt like. Hannah's eyes burned. "And then I ran. You ran because I gave you reason to. Because I was careless, and you heard something you shouldn't have, and you made the smart choice." He reached across the table, careful, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand covered hers. "I don't blame you for running, Hannah. I blame myself for giving you no other option." His hand was warm, familiar, and Hannah felt 7 months of carefully maintained distance beginning to crumble. "I'm still afraid. I know. I don't know if I can trust you. I know that too. But I want to." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "For Lila. For me. I want to believe this is possible." Dante's fingers tightened around hers. "Then let me prove it. One day at a time. I'll show up, I'll keep my promises, and I'll become someone worthy of that trust." Hannah looked at their joined hands, at the man who'd torn apart his empire to find her, at the impossible situation they'd stumbled into. Then she looked at her belly, where Lila was quiet now, maybe sleeping, maybe listening somehow to the conversation that would shape her entire life. "Okay," Hannah whispered. "One day at a time." Dante's eyes closed briefly, relief washing over his face. When he opened them again, they were bright with something that looked dangerously close to hope. "Thank you," he said, "for this chance. I won't waste it." He left an hour later, but this time when he walked away, it felt less like an ending and more like the beginning of something terrifyingly fragile. Hannah locked the door behind him and leaned against it, one hand on her belly, wondering if she'd just made the best decision of her life or the worst. Only time would tell. And time, she was learning, had a way of revealing exactly who people really were beneath all the promises. The days that followed developed a rhythm that felt almost normal. If normal could include daily texts from a former crime boss and weekly ultrasound photos sent to a man systematically dismantling his criminal empire. Dante kept his distance physically. No unexpected visits, no pressure. But his presence was constant in small, careful ways. A text each morning asking how she slept. Photos of baby furniture with questions about what she liked. Links to parenting articles he'd been reading, accompanied by his observations that made Hannah laugh despite herself. "He's going to be insufferable about research," she texted Mrs. Chen one afternoon, showing her landlady a message where Dante had sent a 1,500-word analysis of car seat safety ratings. Mrs. Chen, who'd figured out the situation with the quiet wisdom of someone who'd seen everything twice, just smiled. "A man who cares that much about car seats is a man who'll show up. That matters more than you think." By the 3rd week of November, Hannah had almost convinced herself this could work, that Dante could become someone different, that their makeshift family could take shape around the edges of his transformation. She'd agreed to let him come to her next ultrasound appointment, and the cautious hope in his voice when she'd extended the invitation had made her chest ache. Then Tuesday happened, and hope became complicated all over again. Hannah was leaving the urgent care clinic after her shift, exhausted from 6 hours on her feet and ready for nothing but her bed, when she noticed the car. Black SUV, tinted windows, idling across the street with the engine running. Her nursing instincts said, "Wait, pay attention, something's wrong." And she stopped on the clinic steps, hand instinctively going to her belly. The SUV's passenger door opened and a woman emerged, tall, athletic build, dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, moving with the controlled grace of someone trained in violence. She crossed the street directly toward Hannah, and every alarm bell in Hannah's body started screaming. "Ms. Reed." The woman's voice was professionally neutral. "My name is Celine Vale. I work for Dante Marlowe. He asked me to introduce myself." Hannah's heart hammered. "I don't need protection." "I know. That's what he said you'd say." Celine stopped a respectful distance away, hands visible, posture non-threatening despite everything about her that suggested she could break Hannah in half without effort. "But he'd like you to have it anyway. I'll be discreet." "You're a bodyguard." "Executive security specialist, but yes, essentially." Celine's expression softened slightly. "Look, I understand this is uncomfortable, but Mr. Marlowe has enemies. And now that you're back in his life, those enemies might see you as leverage. I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen." The clinic parking lot suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Hannah glanced around, seeing shadows in every corner. "Has something happened? Some specific threat?" "Not yet, but prevention is always better than response." Celine pulled out a card, offered it. "I'll keep my distance unless you need me. You won't even know I'm there most of the time. But if anything feels wrong, if anyone approaches you who makes you uncomfortable, you call that number immediately." Hannah took the card with numb fingers. "Does Dante know you're here right now?" "He knows I'm introducing myself. The when and how were left to my discretion." A pause. "He's trying very hard not to overstep, Ms. Reed, but he's also terrified something will happen to you or the baby. This is his compromise." After Celine left, melting back into the SUV like she'd never been there, Hannah sat in her car for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel and trying to process. Protection meant danger. Bodyguards meant threats. This wasn't the normal pregnancy experience she'd been desperately trying to build in Providence. This was confirmation that Dante's world had followed her here, that safety was an illusion, that their daughter would be born into shadows whether Hannah wanted it or not. She called him from the parking lot, not bothering with preamble when he answered. "You assigned me a bodyguard?" "Hannah." "Without asking, without discussing it. You just decided I needed protection and sent someone." Dante's voice was careful, measured. "Yes, I did. Because 3 days ago, someone started asking questions about you in Manhattan. Someone connected to a man I had business disputes with 2 years ago. And I will not risk anything happening to you or Lila because I was too cautious about respecting your boundaries." The fear in his voice, raw and undisguised, took the edge off her anger. "What kind of questions?" "Where you disappeared to, if you were connected to me, if you had family elsewhere." He exhaled shakily. "Nothing concrete yet. But Hannah, these people don't ask idle questions. If they're looking into you, it's because they think you matter to me. And they're right." Hannah pressed her free hand to her belly, where Lila was doing her evening gymnastics routine. "Who are they?" "His name is Ronan Cross. We had a territorial dispute over shipping routes in 2024. I won, he lost significant revenue, and he's held a grudge ever since. He's not stupid enough to come after me directly, but if he thinks there's someone I care about..." Dante's voice hardened. "Celine is the best in the business. Former military, specialty in executive protection, completely trustworthy. She'll keep you safe." "I didn't agree to this." "I know, and I'm sorry for that. But I'm not sorry for protecting you, and I won't apologize for doing whatever's necessary to make sure you and Lila are safe." A pause. "You can be angry with me. You can tell me I'm overstepping, but please let Celine do her job." Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, that this was exactly the kind of control she'd been afraid of, that hiring bodyguards without permission was proof Dante would always default to making decisions for her. But she remembered the clinic parking lot, how exposed she'd felt, how vulnerable. And she thought about Lila, about the daughter who couldn't protect herself, who depended entirely on Hannah's choices. "Fine," she said quietly. "But Dante, next time you make a decision that affects my safety, you tell me first, not after. This isn't negotiable." "You're right. I should have called you before sending Celine. It won't happen again." "Good." She hung up before he could say anything else, sat in her car watching the black SUV 2 rows away, and tried not to think about what it meant that her daughter's father had enemies who asked dangerous questions. The ultrasound appointment came that Friday. Hannah arrived at Women and Infants Hospital. She'd decided to transfer her care to Dr. Vance, after all, a decision that had nothing to do with Dante's recommendation and everything to do with the facility's excellent reputation, to find Dante already in the waiting room. He stood when he saw her, dressed in the casual clothes she was getting used to, his expression a mixture of hope and terror. "Thank you for letting me come," he said quietly. "It's your daughter, too." Hannah checked in at the desk, acutely aware of Dante beside her, of the other pregnant women glancing their way, probably wondering about their story. Young couple expecting their first baby? Complicated relationship navigating co-parenting? They'd have no idea how close to the truth and how far away both guesses were. In the ultrasound room, Hannah changed into a gown while Dante waited outside, then called him back in when she was positioned on the examination table. The tech, a cheerful woman named Patricia, started the scan, and the screen flickered to life with familiar black and white shapes. Hannah had seen this view a dozen times now, knew how to read the ghostly images of her daughter. But watching Dante see it for the first time was something else entirely. He stood frozen beside the examination table, staring at the screen like it held the secrets of the universe. And when Patricia pointed out Lila's heartbeat, that rapid, steady flutter, his hand reached out to grip the edge of the table for support. "That's her," he whispered. "That's our daughter." "Sure is, and she's looking great." Patricia moved the wand, capturing measurements. "Good size, strong heartbeat, plenty of movement. You're at 32 weeks now?" 32 and 3 days, Hannah confirmed. "Everything's progressing beautifully. Do you want to know the position?" "Is she breech?" Hannah asked, familiar enough now with pregnancy terminology to know why position mattered. "No, she's head down. Perfect position for delivery." Patricia smiled. "You've got a cooperative baby." Dante hadn't looked away from the screen. His face was transformed, all the hardness gone, replaced by something raw and wondering. When Lila moved on screen, her tiny hand visible for just a moment, he made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something closer to a sob. "Can I?" He gestured toward Hannah's belly, asking permission. Hannah nodded, and Dante's hand settled gently on the swell where the ultrasound wand had been. His palm was warm through the thin gown, and Lila kicked, hard, directly against his touch, as if responding to her father's presence. Dante's breath caught. She kicked. She does that a lot, especially at night. Hannah found herself smiling despite the complicated mess of emotions churning in her chest. "I think she's going to be a soccer player. Or a boxer." His thumb traced a gentle circle. "Strong, like her mother." Patricia printed out images, discreetly giving them space, while Dante stood with his hand on Hannah's belly, talking quietly to their daughter through skin and tissue and time. "Hi, Lila. I'm your dad. I know you can't hear me yet, but I wanted you to know I'm here. I'm going to keep you safe, I promise." Hannah's eyes burned. This version of Dante, soft and overwhelmed and speaking promises to an unborn baby, felt impossibly far from the man who made people flee states and had enemies asking dangerous questions. But both versions were real. Both existed simultaneously, and Hannah had to figure out how to navigate the space between them. After the appointment, Dante walked her to her car, still carrying the ultrasound photos like they were made of glass. "Can I keep one of these?" "Take whichever one you want." He chose the image where Lila's profile was clearest, her tiny nose and lips visible in the grainy black and white. "Thank you for letting me be there. It means everything." "She's your daughter. You should get to see her." Dante looked like he wanted to say more, but settled for, "Drive safe. Text me when you're home." It had become their routine, her texting when she arrived safely, him responding immediately, both of them dancing around the larger conversation about what happened next. But as Hannah pulled out of the parking lot, she saw the black SUV fall into position 3 cars back. Celine, doing her job. Protection that felt like a cage, safety that came with strings attached. November became December, and Providence turned cold and sharp. Hannah's pregnancy crossed into the 34th week, then the 35th, her body transforming into something increasingly unwieldy and foreign. Dante visited twice more, always with permission, always respectful of her space, and each visit chipped away at her careful defenses. He brought her favorite foods, assembled the crib she'd been putting off dealing with, sat with her for hours discussing baby names and parenting philosophies and the thousand small details of preparing for a life they'd be responsible for. He never pushed for more than she offered, never mentioned the investigation that had quietly folded exactly as he'd predicted, never asked to stay the night or tried to reclaim the intimacy they'd once had. He just showed up, present and steady, proving through small actions that he could be someone reliable. But the black SUV was always there, Celine's invisible presence a constant reminder that danger lurked somewhere in the shadows. And Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that they were existing in borrowed time, that the fragile peace they'd built was too delicate to last. The call came on December 10th, 2 days before Hannah's 36th week appointment. She was making dinner, pasta, because it was one of the few things that didn't trigger nausea, when her phone rang with Dante's number. "There's been a development," he said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled tension. "Ronan Cross knows where you are." Hannah's wooden spoon clattered into the pot. "What?" "Someone in Providence sold information. I don't know who yet, but Ronan has your address, your workplace, your routine. Celine's bringing you to a safe location right now. Don't pack, don't hesitate, just go with her." "Dante, I can't just—" "Hannah!" His voice cracked. "Please, I need you safe, both of you. Celine will explain everything, but you need to leave now." A knock on the door, sharp, urgent. Celine's voice through the wood. "Miss Reed, we need to go." Hannah's hand shook as she turned off the stove, grabbed her purse, pulled on shoes with fingers that didn't want to cooperate. This was really happening. The danger Dante had warned about, the threats that had seemed abstract and distant, were suddenly concrete and immediate. Celine had a second woman with her, another security specialist, compact and fierce-looking. They flanked Hannah down the stairs, moved her to a different SUV than usual, and had her lying flat in the back seat before she could fully process what was happening. "Where are we going?" Hannah asked as they pulled away from Benefit Street. "Safe house in the Boston suburbs. Mr. Marlowe is meeting us there." Celine's eyes were on the mirrors, scanning constantly. "We're not being followed, but protocol says we take precautions anyway. What does Ronan want?" "Leverage. You're the fastest way to hurt Mr. Marlowe without triggering the mutual destruction agreements he has in place. Ronan thinks if he has you, he can force concessions." Hannah's hand pressed to her belly. "And if Dante doesn't give him what he wants?" Celine's silence was answer enough. The drive to Boston took 2 hours, taking back roads and doubling back twice to ensure no tail. Hannah spent it texting with Dante, his responses coming in rapid bursts of reassurance and fury that someone had endangered her. The safe house turned out to be a sprawling suburban home in Newton, set back from the road with high fences and security cameras visible on every corner. Dante was waiting inside, pacing the living room like a caged animal. When Hannah walked in, he crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands hovering near her shoulders like he wanted to pull her close, but didn't quite dare. "Are you okay? Is Lila—" "We're fine. Scared, but fine." Hannah let herself lean into him slightly, exhaustion winning over pride. "Dante, what's happening?" He guided her to the couch, sat beside her with careful distance. "Ronan's been planning this for weeks. He had someone watching your apartment, mapping your routine, waiting for the right moment. Celine's team picked up the surveillance 3 days ago, and we've been building a counter-strategy." "Counter-strategy for what?" "For keeping you safe while I deal with Ronan permanently." Dante's voice went cold, and Hannah saw the crime boss emerging through the cracks in the father-to-be. "He threatened you, threatened our daughter. That's not something I can let stand." Fear spiked through her. "What does deal with permanently mean?" "It means I'm going to make sure he never looks in your direction again." "By killing him?" Hannah pulled back, searching his face. "Is that what you're planning? Murder?" Dante's jaw worked. "I'm planning to protect my family by any means necessary. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now." He stood, started pacing again. "Ronan operates out of New York. He has connections in shipping, gambling, some drug distribution. He's well protected, well funded, and he won't stop just because I ask nicely. So I need to either make him stop or make him disappear." Hannah struggled to her feet, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. "You promised me you were changing, that you were walking away from this life, but the first real test comes along and you're ready to kill someone?" He's threatening you. So threaten him back. Use your leverage, your contacts, whatever tools you have that don't involve murder. Her voice cracked. You told me you'd never killed anyone, that you weren't that kind of man. Were you lying? I've never killed anyone, Dante said tightly. But I've hurt people who threatened what's mine. And Hannah, you and Lila are mine. Not as possessions, but as family. As the only things in this world that actually matter. So yes, if it comes down to Ronan or you, I choose you. Every single time. The declaration should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a cage closing around her, the reality of Dante's world crushing the fantasy she'd been building. I can't do this, Hannah whispered. I can't raise a daughter in a world where people get disappeared for being threats. I can't spend every day wondering if you're going to come home covered in blood, or not come home at all because you finally crossed the wrong person. Dante stopped pacing, his face stricken. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe I was wrong. Maybe people don't change this much. Maybe the man you are is fundamentally incompatible with the life I need to give Lila. Hannah, I'll stay here until this Ronan situation is resolved. But after that, she pressed a hand to her eyes, fighting tears. After that, I think I need to leave again. Really leave, somewhere you won't find me. The devastation on Dante's face was absolute. He looked like she'd physically struck him, all the air gone from his lungs. You can't mean that. I don't want to. But I have to put Lila first. And right now being connected to you feels like the most dangerous choice I could make for her. Dante opened his mouth, closed it, seemed to physically struggle with what to say. Finally, he just nodded once, sharp and bitter. I'll keep you safe until the threat is neutralized. Then you can decide. He walked out of the room, and Hannah collapsed back onto the couch, one hand on her belly, where Lila was kicking hard, as if protesting the conversation she couldn't possibly understand. I'm sorry, Hannah whispered to her daughter. I'm so sorry. I wanted to give you both parents. I wanted this to work. But I don't know how to make it safe. The safe house felt like a prison for the next 2 days. Celine and her team maintained constant surveillance. Dante was absent, dealing with the Ronan situation, someone said, and Hannah existed in a fog of fear and grief and anger at the impossible situation she'd stumbled into. On the third morning, she woke to voices downstairs, Dante's, Celine's, and a third she didn't recognize. She made her way down carefully, 36 weeks pregnant and increasingly uncomfortable, to find them gathered in the kitchen around a laptop. Dante looked up when she entered, his face haggard like he hadn't slept in days. Hannah, you should hear this. The third person was a man in his 40s, professional-looking with the careful demeanor of a lawyer. He gestured to the laptop screen. Ms. Reed, I'm Thomas Chen, Mr. Marlowe's attorney. We've been building a case against Ronan Cross for the past 72 hours. Financial crimes, racketeering, 3 counts of assault with deadly weapon, illegal weapons trafficking. Between the FBI evidence we've compiled and the testimony from 5 of his former associates who've agreed to cooperate, Ronan will be in federal custody by tomorrow morning. Hannah stared at the screen, at the documents and evidence files spread across it. You're having him arrested? We're providing law enforcement with everything they need to put him away for 20 years minimum. Dante's voice was rough. No murder, no disappearance, no violence. Just legal consequences for illegal actions. I thought you said you needed to deal with him permanently. I do. This is permanent. Federal prison is very permanent. He met her eyes. You were right. What you said about choosing blood meaning our daughter's life begins in blood. I heard you, Hannah, and I made a different choice. The lawyer continued explaining, something about witness protection for the cooperating associates, about federal prosecutors eager for a case this solid. But Hannah barely heard him. She was looking at Dante, at the exhaustion and determination in his face, at the evidence that he'd spent 3 days building a legal case instead of ordering an execution. You listened, she said quietly when the lawyer finished. I always listen to you. Dante's smile was weary, even when what you're saying terrifies me, especially then. Celine's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked up. FBI is moving on Ronan's location now. They're expecting to have him in custody within the hour. The tension in the room shifted, became cautiously hopeful. Hannah felt it in her chest. The first full breath she'd taken in 3 days, the feeling of walking back from a cliff edge. "So it's over?" she asked. "Not yet," Dante said, "but soon. And when it is, you can decide what happens next. Stay or go. I'll respect your choice." He looked at her belly. "I just hope you'll give me the chance to prove I meant what I said, that I can be better, that I am better, when you and Lila are what I'm being better for." Hannah wanted to answer, but her response was cut off by a sudden, sharp pain low in her belly, different from Lila's kicks, deeper and more insistent. She gasped, one hand flying to her stomach. "Hannah?" Dante was beside her instantly. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. It just—" Another pain, stronger this time, radiating from her lower back around to her front. "Oh. Oh no." Celine was already moving, phone to her ear. "We need an ambulance at the Newton location. Pregnant woman, approximately 36 weeks, possible labor." Labor. At 36 weeks, in a safe house in Boston, with her daughter's father watching her with fear and hope and desperate love all tangled in his expression. Lila, it seemed, had decided she was tired of waiting for her parents to figure out their lives. She was coming now, ready or not, and Hannah could only hold on to Dante's hand and hope they'd all survive what came next. The contractions weren't supposed to feel like this. Hannah had read enough pregnancy books, sat through enough prenatal classes during her lonely Providence evenings to know that early labor was meant to be gradual, slow building waves that gave you time to prepare, to breathe, to get to the hospital with dignity intact. But these pains were sharp and insistent, coming every 4 minutes with an intensity that suggested Lila had her own timeline and wasn't interested in textbook progression. "Breathe," Dante said, his hand steady on her back as another contraction peaked. "Just breathe through it." Hannah wanted to snap at him that she knew how to breathe, that she'd been doing it successfully for 29 years without his guidance, but the pain stole her words and left her gasping against the kitchen counter. When it passed, she straightened slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back where a deep ache had settled. "How far apart?" Celine asked, phone still pressed to her ear, her professional calm a stark contrast to Dante's barely contained panic. 4 minutes, maybe 3.5. Hannah checked her watch, trying to remember when the last one had hit. Time was getting slippery, elastic, hard to track. "They're strong, stronger than I expected." The lawyer, Thomas, had made himself scarce, retreating to another room with his laptop like the messy reality of childbirth was outside his professional scope. Celine finished her call and crossed to Hannah with quick efficiency. "Ambulance is 8 minutes out. We can wait for them, or I can drive you to Beth Israel in 5. Your call." Hannah started to answer, but another contraction hit. Harder, deeper, stealing her breath and buckling her knees. Dante caught her, supporting her weight like it was nothing, and she found herself leaning into him because pride was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. "We drive," Dante said when Hannah couldn't speak. "Now, Celine, you're with us. Everyone else stays here and monitors the Ronan situation." They moved fast, Celine grabbing a bag that apparently contained emergency supplies because, of course, Dante's security team was prepared for spontaneous childbirth, Dante supporting Hannah to the SUV, the whole operation executed with military precision. Hannah was installed in the back seat with Dante beside her, and Celine was pulling out of the driveway before Hannah could fully process that this was happening, that Lila was coming 4 weeks early, that she was going to have her daughter in a Boston hospital instead of the carefully planned Providence delivery she'd imagined. "It's too early," Hannah gasped between contractions. 36 weeks. She needs more time." 36 weeks is safe," Dante said, and the certainty in his voice suggested he'd researched this extensively. "Not ideal, but safe. She'll be fine. You'll both be fine." Hannah wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the universe wouldn't be cruel enough to bring Lila early and in danger after everything they'd already survived. But fear was a living thing in her chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think beyond the next contraction and the one after that. Beth Israel appeared faster than seemed possible. Celine driving with the kind of controlled aggression that suggested extensive tactical training, and then there were hospital staff and a wheelchair and bright lights that made Hannah's eyes water. Dante stayed beside her through intake, answering questions when she couldn't, his hand a constant presence on her shoulder or arm or lower back, grounding her when the pain tried to pull her under. "Doctor, Vance is on her way," a nurse said, checking Hannah's vitals with practiced efficiency. She's about 20 minutes out. In the meantime, let's get you settled and see where we're at. The labor and delivery room was private, spacious, nothing like the crowded chaos of the Mount Sinai ER where Hannah had worked. She changed into a hospital gown while a different nurse started an IV routine precaution, she explained. And then Dr. Vance's colleague, a doctor named Richardson, came in to check her progress. "You're at 5 centimeters, he announced after the examination. "Moving fast for a first baby. At this rate, you'll be ready to push in a few hours." A few hours. Hannah's mind reeled. She'd imagined this moment so many times, alone in Providence, surrounded by strangers, delivering Lila into a world where her father was a ghost. But Dante was here, real and present, his face pale with worry and wonder, and somehow that made everything more complicated and more bearable all at once. Dr. Vance arrived 40 minutes later, sweeping into the room with the calm authority Hannah remembered from their first meeting. She checked the monitors, examined Hannah, and declared everything progressing normally despite the early arrival. "Some babies just have their own schedule," she said with a gentle smile. "Lila seems to be one of them, but everything looks good. Heart rate is strong, you're handling the contractions well, and we'll monitor closely given the 36-week gestation." The hours that followed blurred into a haze of pain and breathing, and Dante's voice talking her through each contraction. He was better at this than Hannah expected. Steady and calm, reading the monitor and warning her when the next peak was coming, reminding her to breathe when she forgot, applying pressure to her lower back exactly where she needed it without being asked. Like he'd studied for this, prepared for it, wanted desperately to be useful. "Where did you learn this?" Hannah asked during a brief respite, her voice hoarse from controlled breathing. "YouTube, books, called 3 different doulas for advice." Dante's smile was sheepish. "I wanted to be prepared, in case you let me be here." Her eyes burned with tears that had nothing to do with pain. "You really thought I'd let you?" "I hoped. Hope's all I've had for 7 months." Another contraction cut off her response, and then there was no space for conversation, only the relentless progression of labor and the mounting pressure that meant Lila was running out of patience with the whole process. By hour 4, Hannah was at 8 centimeters and seriously reconsidering every choice that had led to this moment. The contractions were coming almost continuously now, barely any rest between them, and the epidural she'd initially declined was starting to look like a fantastic idea she'd foolishly rejected. "I changed my mind about the epidural," she gasped to Dr. Vance during the next check. "You're at 9 centimeters. Too late for that now, I'm afraid. But you're almost there, Hannah. You're doing beautifully." "I'm dying. There's a difference." Dante made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. His hand was still in hers. She'd been gripping it hard enough to bruise for the last hour. And when she looked at him, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he said quietly. "And in about an hour, you're going to meet our daughter. You can do this." Hannah wanted to argue, but her body had other priorities. The pressure built to something impossible, overwhelming, and then Dr. Vance was saying something about 10 centimeters and getting ready to push. And there was no more time for fear or doubt or anything except the primal work of bringing Lila into the world. Pushing was brutal and exhausting and nothing like the peaceful births in movies. Hannah bore down with everything she had, Dante supporting her shoulders, Dr. Vance coaching from her position at the foot of the bed, nurses moving around the room with quiet efficiency. Between contractions, Hannah collapsed back against the pillows, certain she couldn't do this again, and then the next wave would hit, and her body would override her mind, and she'd push anyway. "I can see her head," Dr. Vance said, and the excitement in her voice cut through Hannah's exhaustion. "Dark hair, lots of it. Come on, Hannah, one more big push." Hannah gathered every scrap of strength she had left, bore down with a sound that was half scream and half determination, and felt something give. The pressure released all at once, and suddenly there was crying, sharp, indignant, the most beautiful sound Hannah had ever heard. "She's here," Dr. Vance announced, lifting a tiny, furious, perfect baby into view. "It's a girl." Lila was placed on Hannah's chest before she could fully process what had happened, warm and wet and screaming her displeasure at the world, and Hannah's hands came up automatically to hold her daughter for the first time. She was so small, impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and scrunched features, and Hannah fell in love so completely and instantly it felt like her heart cracking open. "Hi, baby," Hannah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hi, Lila. I've got you. You're safe." Beside her, Dante made a broken sound. Hannah looked up to see him staring at their daughter with an expression of such raw wonder it hurt to witness. His hand hovered near Lila's tiny head like he wanted to touch, but didn't quite dare. "You can hold her," Hannah said softly. "I don't want to hurt her. She's so small." "She's stronger than she looks. Aren't you, baby girl?" Hannah stroked Lila's cheek, watched her daughter's crying begin to settle. "Dante, meet your daughter. Lila, this is your dad." Dr. Vance was busy with the aftermath of delivery, things Hannah was vaguely aware of but couldn't focus on because Lila was here, real, breathing, but she paused long enough to smile at them. "She's a good size for 36 weeks, 5 pounds, 8 ounces by my estimate. We'll get exact measurements in a moment, but she looks perfect." A nurse approached with warm blankets, gently cleaning Lila while she lay on Hannah's chest. Another took vitals, checked reflexes, made notes on a chart. The room was organized chaos, but at the center of it was this tiny person who'd upended Hannah's entire life without even being born yet, and now was here making good on that promise. "Her hands," Dante said, his voice thick. "Look at her hands." Lila had one tiny fist near her face, fingers smaller than anything Hannah had imagined. Perfect miniature fingernails, delicate wrinkles at the knuckles. The whole thing no bigger than a walnut. Hannah traced one finger down her daughter's palm. Watched those impossibly small fingers curl reflexively around hers. "She's got a good grip," the nurse observed. "Strong reflexes. All her measurements look excellent." They took Lila briefly, just long enough for a full examination, measurements, the standard newborn procedures, and Hannah watched with her heart in her throat as nurses moved efficiently around her daughter. 5 pounds, 9 ounces according to the official scale, 18 inches long. Perfect APGAR scores. Healthy and strong despite the early arrival. When they brought her back, wrapped in a striped hospital blanket with a tiny pink cap, the nurse looked between Hannah and Dante. "Dad, do you want to try skin-to-skin contact? It's good for bonding." Dante looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Hannah nodded permission, and the nurse showed him how to hold Lila against his bare chest. He'd stripped off his shirt with shaking hands, supporting her head, keeping her secure. The moment Lila settled against her father's chest, her crying stopped. She made a small sound, almost like a sigh, and went still. Dante froze. "Is that normal? Should she be moving?" "She's perfect," the nurse assured him. "Babies often settle when they hear their father's heartbeat. She knows you." Hannah watched her daughter nestle against Dante's chest, watched this dangerous man transform into something impossibly gentle as he cradled their baby like she was made of spun glass. His free hand came up to cup Lila's head, so large against her tiny skull, and when he bent to press a kiss to that dark hair, Hannah saw tears tracking down his face. "Hi, Lila," he whispered. "I'm your dad. I know we haven't met before, but I've been waiting for you. I've been trying to become someone worthy of you." His voice cracked. "I promise I'll protect you. I promise I'll never let anything hurt you. I promise I'll be better every single day because you deserve the best father I can be." Hannah's chest ached watching them. This was what she'd run from. Not just the danger, but this. The vulnerability of loving someone this much, of building a family with a man whose world was constructed from shadows and compromises. But looking at Dante with their daughter, seeing the way he held her like she was the answer to every question he'd never known to ask, Hannah felt her careful walls beginning to crumble. The hours after delivery passed in a blur of exhaustion and elation. Hannah was moved to a recovery room, private, comfortable, nothing like she'd expected, while Lila stayed with them, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet when she wasn't nursing or being held. Dante seemed unable to stop staring at his daughter, watching her sleep like he was memorizing every detail. "You should get some rest," Hannah told him around midnight. She was propped up in the hospital bed, sore and exhausted but too wired to sleep. Lila had just finished nursing and was back in her bassinet, making the small snuffling sounds that apparently all newborns made. "I'm not leaving." Dante had claimed the chair beside Hannah's bed hours ago and showed no signs of moving. "Not unless you want me to." I don't want you to, Hannah admitted quietly. But Dante, we need to talk about what happens next. When we leave here, where we go. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes on Lila. I told you I'd respect your choice. Stay or go. That hasn't changed. Things have changed, though. Everything's changed. Hannah gestured to their sleeping daughter. She's here. She's real. And I can't make decisions just for me anymore. What do you want, Hannah? Not what you think is safest, not what makes sense on paper. What do you actually want? She looked at him, really looked. At the exhaustion in his face, the wonder, the fear. At the man who'd spent 7 months searching, who'd dismantled his empire piece by piece, who'd chosen legal justice over violence when every instinct probably screamed otherwise. At Lila's father, who held their daughter like she was made of light. I want to believe this can work, she said finally. I want to believe you can be the man you promised to become. I want Lila to have both her parents, a real family, not fragments held together by custody arrangements and careful distance. But I'm terrified of your world, of the danger that follows you, of making the wrong choice and having Lila pay for it. Hannah's voice dropped to a whisper. What if loving you is the mistake that destroys everything? Dante flinched like she'd struck him. He was quiet for a long time, staring at their daughter, his jaw working. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. The night you disappeared, I tore Manhattan apart looking for you. Called in every favor, threatened people I should have left alone, terrified that something had happened and I'd never know. And when I finally accepted you'd run, that you'd chosen to disappear rather than stay with me, I had to face what that meant. That I'd become someone a woman would rather vanish than confront. He stood, moved to Lila's bassinet, his hand hovering over her sleeping form without quite touching. I built an empire on fear and leverage. I told myself it was necessary, that I was better than the alternatives, that I kept violence to a minimum. But you heard one phone call and knew exactly what I was. And you ran because staying meant accepting that darkness. Dante, I'm not finished. He turned to face her, and his expression was raw, unguarded. I've spent 7 months dismantling that empire. Not because I want credit, not to win you back, but because you were right. A child shouldn't grow up in that world. Our daughter deserves better. And I could either be the man I was, or I could become someone worthy of being Lila's father. I couldn't be both. Hannah's throat tightened. You really walked away from all of it? Thomas can show you the documents, the sales, the transfers, the legal restructuring. By February, Dante Marlowe won't exist in any criminal database. I'll be completely legitimate, boring even. Investment management and commercial real estate. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous. He smiled without humor. I'm told legitimate business is significantly less profitable, but it has the advantage of not requiring bodyguards or worrying about federal investigations. What about Ronan and anyone else who might come after you? Ronan will be in federal custody by tomorrow. The others, Dante's expression hardened. I made it very clear that I'm out. That anyone who comes after me or my family triggers the release of evidence that brings everyone down together. Mutually assured destruction. It's not elegant, but it works. That's still leverage, still using fear to control people. Yes, and I won't apologize for that. I'm walking away from the criminal empire, Hannah, but I'm not naive enough to do it without insurance. If that makes me still too dangerous for you, I understand. But I will not leave my daughter unprotected because of philosophical purity. Hannah absorbed that, turned it over in her mind. He was right. Naive idealism would get them killed. But calculated protection, using the tools he had to ensure safety while building something different, that was compromise. It was messy and imperfect, but it was honest. Show me the documents, she said finally. Thomas is evidence that you're really out. I need to see it with my own eyes. Relief flooded Dante's face. I'll call him first thing in the morning. He can bring everything here, walk you through every transaction, every transfer, every legal change. You'll see it all. Lila stirred in her bassinet, making a small whimpering sound that immediately had both parents on alert. Hannah started to get up. Everything hurt, moving was agony, but Dante was already there, lifting their daughter with careful hands, bringing her to Hannah. I think someone's hungry again, he said softly. Hannah took Lila, settled her to nurse, and watched Dante watch them with an expression of such fierce protectiveness it made her chest ache. This was what family looked like, she realized. Not perfect, not simple, but real. Complicated and messy and built on the ruins of mistakes they'd both made. "I'm not promising anything yet," Hannah said as Lila nursed, "but I'm willing to try, to see if this can work, if you can really be the man you say you're becoming. That's all I'm asking for, a chance to prove it. And if you can't, if the danger follows us anyway, or if I decide this is still too much." Dante's expression went carefully neutral. "Then the trust fund is already set up. Lila will have everything she needs. I'll stay in her life as much as you allow and no more. I won't fight you for custody or make this harder than it has to be." "You just accept that? Walk away?" "I'd respect your decision, because you're her mother and you get to decide what's safe for her. I don't have to like it, but I'll honor it." He met her eyes. "I love you, Hannah. I've loved you since you told me to eat better in a Manhattan ER at 3 in the morning. But I love our daughter more. And if the best thing I can do for Lila is stay at a distance, then that's what I'll do." The declaration hung in the air between them, heavy with history and hope and the terrible weight of loving someone when the stakes were this high. Hannah looked at Lila, nursing peacefully, oblivious to the adult complications swirling around her tiny life. "I don't want you at a distance," Hannah heard herself say. "I want you close. I want Lila to know her father. I want—" She paused, gathering courage. "I want to try to be a family. A real one. Even if I'm terrified of what that means." Dante's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, they were bright with tears he didn't bother hiding. "Thank you for trusting me enough to try." They stayed awake most of that first night, taking turns holding Lila, watching her sleep, marveling at her tiny perfection. Dante left only once, early morning, to handle the Ronan situation and retrieve Thomas with his documentation, and returned 2 hours later with confirmation that Ronan Cross was officially in federal custody, charged with enough crimes to guarantee decades behind bars. "It's done," he said, settling back into the chair beside Hannah's bed. "He'll never be a threat to you again." Thomas arrived mid-morning with a briefcase full of documents, and Hannah spent 3 hours reading through evidence of Dante's systematic dismantling of his criminal empire. Sales contracts for the shipping operations, transfer agreements for the casinos, corporate restructuring that separated legitimate businesses from anything questionable, bank statements showing assets moving into legal trusts and investment accounts. It was all real, all documented, all proof that Dante had been doing exactly what he'd promised, burning down his old life and building something different from the ashes. "The last pieces will finalize by mid-February," Thomas explained. "After that, you're completely clean. No criminal ties, no questionable associations, nothing that would raise flags in any background check." Hannah looked at Dante, who was holding Lila against his shoulder, patting her tiny back with infinite gentleness. "Why February? Some contracts have mandatory waiting periods. Some transfers require regulatory approval. I can't rush it without raising suspicion." Dante's eyes met hers. "But I swear to you, Hannah, by February 15th, I'm out completely." She wanted to believe him. Looking at the evidence spread across her hospital bed, at their daughter sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, Hannah felt belief becoming something possible instead of foolish. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll try this. Really try. But Dante, if anything happens, any threat, any danger, any sign that your old life is catching up to us, I'm gone. And I won't give you another chance to find me." "Understood, and fair." He adjusted Lila carefully, supporting her head. "Where do you want to live? Boston? Providence? Somewhere else entirely?" Hannah considered. Providence felt tainted now, associated with running and fear and the months she'd spent hiding. Manhattan was out of the question. But Boston was new territory for both of them. Neutral ground. Here, she decided, Boston. Somewhere with good schools, safe neighborhood, close to the hospital. She gestured at the documents. "You can afford it." Dante smiled slightly. "I can. I'll have Celine start looking at properties tomorrow. Nothing too large, nothing that draws attention. Just a home." "A home," Hannah echoed. The word felt fragile and impossible and desperately wanted all at once. "For the three of us. For the three of us, Dante confirmed, and the way he said it, like a vow, like a promise he'd die to keep, made Hannah think maybe, impossibly, they might actually survive this after all. They brought Lila home on a Tuesday afternoon 3 days after her birth, and home turned out to be a furnished apartment in Brookline that Celine had secured within 24 hours of Hannah's decision to stay. It wasn't permanent, just a temporary landing place while they looked for something more suitable, but it had everything they needed: 2 bedrooms, updated kitchen, a nursery already set up with a crib and changing table, and the kind of thoughtful details that suggested Celine had consulted extensively with someone who actually knew about babies. Hannah carried Lila through the door in her car seat, still moving carefully from the lingering soreness of delivery, and felt the strangeness of the moment settle over her. A week ago, she'd been alone in Providence, convinced that distance was the only protection she could offer her daughter. Now she was walking into a Boston apartment with Dante behind her carrying bags, about to attempt the terrifying experiment of building a family with a man who'd spent a decade operating in shadows. "The nursery is down the hall," Dante said, setting the bags down in the living room. "Celine stocked it with basics, but we can get anything else you need. And there's a meal service delivering dinner tonight. I figured neither of us would have energy to cook." Hannah set the car seat down gently, unbuckling Lila with practiced hands. 3 days in the hospital had given her a crash course in newborn care, and while she was still terrified of breaking her impossibly fragile daughter, at least she knew how to change a diaper without panicking. "You've thought of everything." "I had help. Celine, Thomas, Dr. Vance, 3 different parenting books, and a very patient woman at the baby store who didn't laugh when I asked if newborns needed special laundry detergent." He smiled slightly. "Turns out they do." Hannah lifted Lila from the car seat, and her daughter immediately curled against her chest with that instinctive seeking motion that still made Hannah's heart clench. "She's going to need to eat soon. I should feed her before she gets too upset." "Do you want the nursery or would you rather be comfortable?" "Comfortable sounds good." Dante led her to the master bedroom, which had a large armchair positioned near the window, perfect for nursing, and excused himself to give them privacy. Hannah settled into the chair, got Lila latched, and let herself breathe for the first time since leaving the hospital. This was real. This was happening. She was a mother now, with all the terrifying responsibility that entailed, and she'd chosen to do this with Dante instead of alone. Please let this be the right choice, she thought, watching Lila nurse with single-minded determination. Please let him be who he promises to be. The first 2 weeks were survival. Lila woke every 2 hours to eat, turning their nights into a blur of feeding and diaper changes and the desperate attempt to sleep whenever possible. Dante threw himself into fatherhood with the same intense focus he'd apparently applied to everything else in his life, learning to change diapers and swaddle and rock Lila to sleep with a competence that surprised Hannah. He took the night shift when he could, bringing Lila to Hannah for feeding, then handling everything else so Hannah could rest, and if he was exhausted from the constant interruptions, he never complained. They existed in a strange bubble those first weeks. Just the 3 of them in the Brookline apartment. The outside world kept at bay while they figured out how to be a family. Celine checked in daily, but maintained distance. Thomas called twice with updates on the final business transfers. Dr. Vance visited once to check on Lila and declared her thriving despite the early arrival. But the real test came in mid-January, 6 weeks after Lila's birth, when Hannah's fears about Dante's past came roaring back in the form of a late-night phone call. It was 2 a.m. Hannah had just finished nursing Lila and was trying to get her back to sleep when she heard Dante's voice from the living room, low and intense, the tone that made Hannah's stomach drop, because she recognized it from that night in June, the voice he used when handling problems that existed in darkness. She settled Lila in her crib, waited until her daughter's breathing evened into sleep, then crept down the hall. Dante was standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand clenched into a fist. "I don't care what he wants," Dante said, his voice cold and precise. "I'm out. I made that clear to everyone. If Vincent's son thinks he can pull me back in for one last job, he's mistaken." Hannah's heart stopped. Vincent, the man who'd first brought Dante into this life, the original empire builder. His son was calling in the middle of the night, asking for help, and Dante was saying no. But the fact that the call had happened at all meant the past wasn't as buried as they'd hoped. "Tell him to find someone else. I'm done. Completely done. And if he keeps calling, I'll make sure the information I've been holding about his father's original operations finds its way to people who'd be very interested. Dante's voice dropped to something dangerous. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Leave me alone, leave my family alone, and everyone stays safe. Keep pushing, and I burn it all down. He ended the call without waiting for a response, and stood staring out the window for a long moment before seeming to sense Hannah's presence. When he turned, his expression was exhausted and furious in equal measure. "How much did you hear?" he asked quietly. "Enough." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself. "Vincent's son is trying to pull you back in? He's desperate. Some deal went wrong and he thinks I can fix it because I used to handle Vincent's difficult situations. But I told him months ago I was out. This was him testing whether I meant it." Dante crossed to her, stopped a careful distance away. "I meant it, Hannah. I'm not going back to that world. Not for him, not for anyone. You threatened him. I protected us. There's a difference." His jaw tightened. "I have insurance, documentation about illegal operations from Vincent's original empire, information that would bring down a lot of powerful people if it went public. It's my leverage to make sure they leave us alone. And yes, I'll use it if I have to." Hannah wanted to be angry about the continued use of threats and leverage, but looking at Dante, at the determination in his face, the protectiveness, she understood. He wasn't trying to control people for power anymore. He was using the tools he had to keep his family safe. It wasn't clean or simple, but it was honest. "No more calls like that," she said finally. "If someone from your past contacts you, I need to know. No secrets, Dante. Not about this." "Agreed. I should have told you he'd been reaching out. I was handling it, but I should have told you anyway." He hesitated. "Hannah, the deadline is February 15th. One more month and all the final transfers complete. After that, I'll have nothing left they want. The calls will stop because I won't have value to them anymore. And if they don't stop, then I release the information and everyone goes down together. Mutually assured destruction. But it won't come to that. These people are practical. They won't risk exposure over someone who's already out." Hannah wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, because the alternative was spending the rest of her life jumping at shadows, wondering when the past would catch up to them again. "1 month," she said. "After February 15th, this is done, completely done. Or I take Lila and leave, and this time you really won't find me." The threat landed hard. She saw it in the way Dante flinched, in the flash of fear across his face. But he nodded, accepting the ultimatum. 1 month, and then it's over. February crept forward with agonizing slowness. Dante spent hours with Thomas, finalizing the last transfers, signing documents, severing the final ties to his criminal past. Hannah spent those hours with Lila, learning her daughter's rhythms, marveling at how much she changed day by day. Lila was getting bigger, more alert, starting to track faces and make small cooing sounds that felt like the beginning of communication. They were also looking at houses, real houses, permanent homes where they could build a life that didn't feel temporary. Celine arranged viewings, and Hannah and Dante spent afternoons walking through possibilities in Newton and Brookline and Cambridge, trying to imagine which space could hold their future. The house they chose was in Newton, a quiet neighborhood with good schools and tree-lined streets that felt a million miles from Manhattan's intensity. 3 bedrooms, updated kitchen, a yard where Lila could eventually play. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth, just a comfortable home for a small family trying to figure out how to be normal. They closed on February 10th, 5 days before Dante's deadline, and spent the weekend moving in. It was strange and domestic and terrifying. Unpacking boxes, assembling furniture, arguing about where things should go like regular couples did. Hannah kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some crisis to shatter the fragile peace they'd built. But February 15th arrived with nothing more dramatic than Lila's 2-month pediatrician appointment and a text from Thomas confirming that the final transfer had processed successfully. Dante Marlowe was now, legally and completely, out of the criminal world he'd spent a decade building. "It's done," Dante said that evening, showing Hannah the confirmation documents. "Every asset sold or transferred, every connection severed. The only thing I still have is the insurance information, and that stays locked away unless someone forces me to use it." Hannah scanned the documents, her legal knowledge limited but sufficient to understand what she was seeing. Complete divestment, clean break, The end of one life and the beginning of another. How does it feel? She asked. Dante was quiet for a moment, looking at Lila where she lay on her playmat, tracking the mobile above her with serious concentration. Strange. I built that empire from nothing. Spent 10 years making it powerful, making myself powerful. And now it's gone. And I'm just... He trailed off. Just what? Just a man with a family. No empire, no reputation, no fear keeping people in line. Just Lila's father and your... He hesitated. What am I to you, Hannah? We've never actually defined that. It was a fair question. They'd been living together for 6 weeks, co-parenting, existing in domestic intimacy, without ever discussing what their relationship actually was. Hannah had been too afraid to examine it too closely, worried that naming it would make it real, and therefore vulnerable to destruction. I don't know, she admitted. We're not what we were in Manhattan, but we're more than just co-parents. We're somewhere in between, and I don't have a word for it. Can I tell you what I want? Dante asked quietly. Hannah's heart kicked up. Okay. I want to be your partner in every sense. Not because of Lila, though she's the best reason I can imagine, but because I love you, Hannah. I've loved you since you were brave enough to run from me, and I'll love you when we're old and Lila's grown, and all of this is just history we survived together. He moved closer, careful not to crowd her. I want to build a life with you, real and permanent. No secrets, no shadows, just us figuring out how to be ordinary people who happen to love each other. Hannah's throat tightened. She looked at this man who'd torn apart his empire for her, who'd chosen legal justice over violence, who held their daughter like she was made of light, and felt the last of her careful walls crumbling. I'm still scared, she whispered. I know. I'm scared you'll slip back into old patterns, that someone from your past will come after us, that I'll wake up one day and realize I made a terrible mistake letting you into our lives. All reasonable fears. Dante's hand found hers, warm and steady. I can't promise perfection, Hannah. I can't promise there won't be hard days or that my past won't cast shadows sometimes. But I can promise I'll choose you every single day. You and Lila. Over power, over money, over everything I used to think mattered. You're what matters now. Hannah looked at their joined hands, then at Lila on her playmat, then back to Dante's face. I want to try. Really try. Not just co-parenting or being careful roommates, but actually building something together. Relief and joy flooded his expression. Yeah? Yeah. But Dante, I need you to understand, if you ever lie to me, if you ever hide something important, if I find out you've been keeping secrets about your past or present or anything that affects our family, I'm done. No second chances. I can forgive a lot of things, but not dishonesty. No lies, he agreed immediately. Complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, even when I'm afraid of how you'll react. You'll always know the truth. And no going back to that life. Ever. I don't care what crisis happens or who calls asking for help. You're out, permanently out, and that's non-negotiable. I'm out, permanently. The only time I touch any of that again is if someone threatens you or Lila, and then I'll use everything I know to protect you. But otherwise, I'm done. Hannah studied his face, looking for any hint of deception or reservation, and found only fierce determination. Okay, then let's try this. Let's be a real family. Dante's smile was tremulous and beautiful. He pulled her gently into his arms, careful of her healing body, and held her like she was precious. Thank you for giving me this chance, for believing I can be better. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other while Lila made happy gurgling sounds on her playmat, and Hannah let herself believe that maybe, impossibly, against all odds, they were going to be okay. The weeks that followed felt like learning to breathe in a new atmosphere. They settled into the Newton house, established routines, figured out how to be partners instead of just co-parents. Dante threw himself into legitimate business with the same intensity he'd once applied to criminal enterprise, building an investment portfolio and commercial real estate holdings that were boring and legal and surprisingly profitable. Hannah started looking into nursing positions at local hospitals, planning a return to work once Lila was a bit older. They also started the slow, careful process of rebuilding intimacy beyond the physical. Long conversations after Lila went to sleep, talking about their fears and hopes and the complicated path that had brought them here. Shared cooking duties that ended in laughter when Dante's attempts at domestic competence crashed spectacularly. Quiet moments on the couch with Lila between them, both of them marveling at how a tiny person could so completely transform everything they thought they knew about love. It wasn't perfect. Dante had nightmares sometimes, dreams of his old life catching up, of losing Hannah and Lila, of failing to protect them. Hannah still felt anxiety spike whenever an unknown number called, still checked over her shoulder sometimes in parking lots, still carried the trauma of months spent running and hiding. But they worked through it together. Dante started seeing a therapist specializing in trauma and life transitions. Hannah's suggestion, his agreement, and came back from sessions raw but committed to doing the work. Hannah joined a support group for new mothers and found solidarity in other women navigating the chaos of early parenthood. And Lila grew. 2 months became 3, then 4. She started smiling, real, genuine smiles that lit up her whole face, and the first time she smiled at Dante, he cried. She began reaching for toys, tracking movement across a room, making sounds that were the foundation of language. Every day brought new developments, new milestones, new evidence that their daughter was thriving. In late April, 4 months after Lila's birth, they took her to meet Mrs. Chen in Providence. The older woman who'd rented Hannah a room and asked no questions welcomed them into her home with warm acceptance, immediately claiming grandmother privileges and spoiling Lila with knitted blankets and stories about Hannah's time in hiding. "I knew you'd figure it out," Mrs. Chen told Hannah, while Dante walked Lila around the garden, pointing out flowers like she could understand. "That first day you showed up scared and pregnant, I could see you were running from something. But I also saw you were strong enough to survive whatever came next." "I almost didn't," Hannah admitted. "I almost kept running." "But you didn't. You chose to fight for your family instead. That takes more courage than running ever could." Hannah watched Dante with their daughter, saw the gentle way he supported her head, the running commentary he maintained about the flowers and birds and everything in the garden. This was the man people had feared, the crime boss who'd built an empire on leverage and intimidation. Now he was just a father showing his daughter tulips. "I'm still scared sometimes," Hannah confessed. "Good. Fear keeps you careful, but don't let it keep you from living." Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand. "You've got something rare, Hannah. A man who chose to change for you. Not many people get that kind of love." The words stayed with Hannah as they drove back to Newton that evening, Lila sleeping peacefully in her car seat, Dante's hand warm in hers. She'd spent so long being afraid, first of Dante's world, then of making the wrong choice, then of the past catching up. But maybe it was time to stop waiting for disaster and start trusting the life they were building. That night, after Lila was asleep and they were alone in their bedroom, Hannah initiated intimacy for the first time since before the pregnancy. Dante responded with careful reverence, treating her like she might break, and it was different than before. Slower, deeper, weighted with everything they'd survived to get here. "I love you," Hannah whispered against his shoulder afterward, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. Dante pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. "You've never said that before, not since Manhattan." "I've been too scared to say it. Scared it would make me vulnerable, give you power over me." Hannah touched his face gently. "But I do love you, the man you are now, the father you've become, the partner you're trying to be every single day." He kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promise, and held her like she was the answer to prayers he'd stopped believing would be answered. "I love you too," he said against her hair, "more than I knew was possible. You and Lila are everything." Summer arrived, and with it came a milestone Hannah had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The trust fund Dante had established for Lila came with documentation that Hannah finally forced herself to examine in detail. $2 million set aside before Lila was born, managed by an independent trustee, untouchable by either parent until Lila turned 18. But there was more. Additional documents dated February 16th, the day after Dante's final business transfers completed, showing another investment. A foundation established in Lila's name, funded with $5 million, dedicated to supporting women and children escaping dangerous situations. Shelters, legal aid, relocation assistance, everything Hannah had needed when she'd run and had to cobble together with fake IDs and cash transactions. "When did you do this?" Hannah asked, showing him the documents. Dante looked almost embarrassed. The day after I finalized getting out, I had all this money from selling the businesses, and I wanted to do something good with it, something that honored what you went through, what you survived. $5 million? I can afford it. The commercial real estate is doing well, and I don't need much. This felt right. He paused. I was hoping you might want to be involved. Help guide where the money goes. You know what women in those situations need better than any consultant I could hire. Hannah stared at the documents, at this tangible proof that Dante wasn't just walking away from his old life, but actively trying to repair some of the damage that world caused. You're really not the same man I ran from. I'm trying not to be. Every day, I'm trying. She kissed him then, deep and grateful, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a Manhattan ER to a Providence clinic to a Newton home. From fear to trust to something that felt remarkably like happiness. On Lila's 6-month birthday in June, they had a small celebration, just the three of them and Celine, who'd become something like family over the months of protecting them and then helping them settle into normal life. Lila sat in her high chair, fascinated by the cake they'd made her, reaching for it with chubby hands and laughing when Dante made funny faces. Hannah watched her daughter, healthy and happy and completely unaware of the complicated history that had preceded her arrival, and felt peace settling into her bones for the first time in over a year. "What are you thinking about?" Dante asked quietly, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of wine. "How different this is from what I imagined. 6 months ago, I thought I'd be doing this alone, hiding somewhere, keeping Lila safe by keeping you away." She accepted the wine, took a sip. "I'm glad I was wrong." "Me too." He watched Lila, his expression soft. "Being her father is the best thing I've ever done. Being with you again is the second best. Everything else I accomplished before this doesn't even register." "No regrets about walking away from all that power?" "Not for a second." Dante turned to face her fully. "Hannah, I want to ask you something, and you can say no. There's no pressure, no expectation, but I need to ask anyway." Hannah's heart kicked up. "Okay." He set down his wine glass, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small velvet box. Hannah's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring, diamond solitaire, classic setting, nothing ostentatious. "I know we've done everything backwards," Dante said, his voice slightly shaking. "Baby first, living together, building a life in completely the wrong order. But I want to make it right. I want to marry you, Hannah, not because of Lila, though she's the best reason I can imagine, but because I love you, because I want everyone to know you're my partner, because I want to build the rest of my life with you." He dropped to one knee, awkward in the kitchen with their 6-month-old daughter smearing cake on her face 3 feet away, and looked up at Hannah with his heart in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on the man I'm becoming and let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you?" Hannah looked at him. This man who'd searched for her across 3 states, who'd dismantled an empire to prove he could change, who held their daughter like she was made of starlight, who'd chosen love over power and kept choosing it every single day, and felt certainty settle in her chest. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Dante's face transformed with joy. He stood, slipped the ring onto her finger, and kissed her while Lila clapped her sticky hands together like she understood the significance of the moment. They were married in September in a small ceremony in their Newton backyard. Just close friends, Mrs. Chen, Celine, Thomas, and Dr. Vance, who delivered Lila and then helped Hannah navigate those early terrifying weeks of motherhood. Leela was there too, 8 months old and determined to steal the show in her flower girl dress, making everyone laugh when she tried to eat the flower petals. Hannah wore a simple ivory dress and carried wildflowers, and when she walked toward Dante under the arbor they'd built together, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. All the fear and running and desperate choices that had somehow, impossibly, led to this moment. "I used to think love was supposed to be easy," Hannah said during her vows. Lila balanced on her hip because their daughter refused to be set down. Safe and simple and uncomplicated, but what we have is better than easy. It's real. Built on honesty and hard choices, and the decision to keep choosing each other even when it's terrifying. Dante's vows were shorter but no less powerful. "You saved me," he said simply. "From a life that was destroying me piece by piece, from becoming someone I'd hate. from missing the only things that actually matter. You and Lila are my redemption, my purpose, my everything, and I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that matched, and when the officiant pronounced them married, the small gathering cheered. Lila chose that moment to grab a handful of Hannah's hair and laugh, and the moment was perfect in its messy, imperfect reality. That evening, after the guests had left and Lila was finally asleep after far too much excitement, Hannah and Dante sat on their back porch watching fireflies dance across the yard. "Mrs. Chen told me something in Providence," Hannah said, her head on Dante's shoulder. "She said I had something rare, a man who chose to change for me. And she was right, but it's more than that. You didn't just change. You let me see the changing, all the hard work and backsliding and terrifying moments of facing who you'd been. That's the real gift." Dante pressed a kiss to her hair. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without knowing that you and Lila were waiting on the other side of all that work. You gave me a reason to be better." "We gave each other reasons." Hannah turned to look at him. "You gave me the courage to stop running, to trust that safety doesn't have to mean loneliness, that love is worth the risk." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies, and Hannah thought about the future spreading out before them. Lila growing up in this house, starting school, bringing home friends, and eventually having her own complicated life to navigate. More children, maybe, if they decided they wanted to expand their family. Years of ordinary days and extraordinary moments, all of it built on the foundation they'd fought so hard to establish. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't run that night?" Hannah asked. "If I'd stayed in Manhattan, confronted you about what I heard?" Dante considered. "Honestly, I don't know. I'd like to think I would have chosen to change anyway, but I'm not sure I would have had the clarity to see what I was becoming without you disappearing. Sometimes the shock of loss is what it takes to wake someone up. And if you hadn't found me, if I disappeared completely, then I'd have spent the rest of my life looking, and Lila would have grown up without knowing her father, and you'd have raised her to be incredible anyway, and I'd have missed everything that matters." His arm tightened around her. "I'm grateful every day that didn't happen, that you gave me this chance." Hannah thought about all the versions of their story that could have existed. Her alone in Providence, Dante still running his empire, their daughter growing up in fragments. And she thought about the version they'd chosen instead, messy and hard-won and real. "I'm grateful too," she said softly, "for all of it, even the scary parts, because they brought us here." Inside, Lila made a small sound through the baby monitor, not quite crying, just the sleepy murmur that meant she was shifting positions. Hannah and Dante both went still, listening, ready to respond if she needed them. But the sound settled back into peaceful breathing, and they relaxed again. "She's getting so big," Dante said. 8 months already. Soon she'll be walking, then talking, then telling us she's too old for us to understand her problems." Hannah laughed. "Let's not rush it. I'm still getting used to the sleep deprivation." "Fair point." He stood, offered her his hand. "Come on, let's go to bed while we can actually sleep." They went inside together, checked on Lila one more time. She was sleeping peacefully, her favorite stuffed elephant clutched in tiny hands, and then retreated to their own room. As Hannah settled into bed beside her husband, feeling the warmth of him next to her and the quiet peace of their home around them, she thought about safety. Real safety wasn't distance or fake IDs or running until exhaustion made the fear manageable. Real safety was this: trust hard-won and carefully maintained, love that had survived testing, a partner who chose every day to be worthy of the faith she placed in him. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Dante whispered back. "Forever." And Hannah believed him. Not blindly, not naively, but with the clear-eyed certainty of someone who'd seen him at his worst and watched him fight to become better. They'd both been broken in different ways, both made terrible choices, both hurt each other through fear and desperation and the impossibility of loving someone when the stakes were life and death. But they'd survived, built something real from the ruins, created a family that was messy and complicated and absolutely worth every terrifying moment it had taken to get here. Outside, fireflies danced in the summer darkness. Inside, their daughter slept peacefully. And in their bedroom, Hannah and Dante held each other close, two people who'd found their way through shadows into light and chose every day to keep walking forward together. The dangerous man and the woman who'd run from him had become something different, something better. A family built on honesty and hard work and the stubborn refusal to let fear win. And for the first time since that night in a Manhattan apartment, when she'd overheard a phone call that changed everything, Hannah Chen, now Hannah Marlowe, felt completely, genuinely, permanently safe. Not because the world had become less dangerous, but because she'd stopped facing it alone.